Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book, the show comparison for the Expanse Season 5, Episode 5, Down and Out. In this video, I compare the Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well these adaptations work. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to the end of Season 5. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't read the novels, not to worry, nothing beyond Season 5 will be spoiled, so you are safe from future spoilers. So our episode begins with Drummer's faction as they watch the news of the attacks that occurred on Earth and how devastating they were. Axwana, who is on a different ship, calls Drummer and suggests they all should be together now, as she knows Drummer will be blaming herself for letting Marco go and for the death of her mentor Fred Johnson, and she is correct. Drummer says she had she simply executed Marco when she had the chance, none of this would have happened, but Axwana tells her that that's hindsight and she must look to the future. Then they get a message that Marco would like to meet with them to discuss their faction joining his. Once they're together, her crew talk about how the Inners will make it harder for them and lock down the belt, making it harder for them to pirate. Michio says the best course of action is to stay in the shadows until this all blows over, but Drummer announces that isn't an option as Marco Naros asks to meet with them and says that she has accepted. So, as always, none of this happened in the books, as Drummer's role is entirely different, although, as I mentioned before, in the show, Drummer takes on the role of the book character Michio Pa, but we don't see her until book 6, so we don't see how she reacted to the attacks on Earth, but we do know her band had to reluctantly join forces with Marco Inaros, even though she didn't really like him. But she certainly didn't have the history with Marco that Drummer in the show has. So there wasn't nearly as much bad blood between them. Also, when Drummer's crew watches the news, it estimates that the casualties on Earth would be in the millions, whereas in the novels, the news estimated the casualty to be in the billions. And overall, the attack was portrayed as a lot more devastating in the novels. Also, the UN wasn't cracking down on the belt. On the contrary, they had to put their focus on protecting Earth, which gave the OPA pretty much free range of the belt. And also in the novels, we do get the Belters' perspective on the reaction to the attacks on Earth through the Belters on Tycho Station, who wear armbands in solidarity with Earth, and how the Belters there reject these attacks. So although I do like the glimpse of seeing the Belters' reaction to this attack, I do prefer the novel's version of events. I like how the attacks were described as more devastating and how the UNN had to abandon the belt, so I'm going to give this a -2. Next we go to Earth, where Amos and Clarissa have been thrown to the ground after the meteor hit. Amos helps her up to find that the structure of the room has been compromised and that it could collapse at any minute. He can't get the door open, so he calls for help. The guard named Rona comes and opens the door for him, and he tells them that they need to get to the surface as the whole structure could collapse at any moment. However, when Clarissa tries to leave her room, Rona points her gun at her, saying that they're in lockdown and prisoners need to stay in their rooms. Amos tells her that he's not leaving without Clarissa and that he's a civilian that needs to be evacuated. When Rona hesitates, Amos reminds her that he has friends in high places, so she reluctantly agrees. She takes them out to the main lobby where two other guards, Sullivan and Morris, complain about her letting the prisoner out of her room, but Rona says that she'll take full responsibility. So they then try to get to the stairs to evacuate, but the stairwell has collapsed and has completely caved in. Amos suggests trying the elevator shaft, but the door is shut and they can't get it open. Sullivan then says that he has a bad idea, and when they see the guards approach, Konachek is screaming in his room. They bring him to the elevator and asks if he can open it, and he simply tells them that he knows that they can't. But Myrna tells him to open it or it's back in his room, so he does. But they find that the maintenance ladder is secure behind bolted hatches. So this is pretty close to what happened in the novels, although in the novels this was the third asteroid hit that hit near them, not the second, so they were already well aware of what was going on, where here they seemed a bit more confused. Also, at first, Rona wouldn't even let Amos out of Clarissa's room, insisting they were in lockdown, and Clarissa and Rona had to plead. Amos and Clarissa had to plead and convince her to let her out. Once out, Konachek was already out of his room, and they had planned to evacuate both Clarissa and Konachek from the very beginning, but they faced the same issue with the stairway and the elevator shaft. Either way works for their respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. So we then go over to Tycho Station, where we see Holden recording a message to Naomi telling her about everything that's happened and begging her to call him back as soon as she gets this message. Holden then goes to where Sakai is being held to see Bull dressing down the guard who was guarding her cell, as apparently he beat her up because she wouldn't stop smiling at him, and Bull was not at all happy about it. Bull and Holden then entered the cell and interrogate her about where the protomolecule sample is being taken, and Bull threatens to cut off her fingers one by one until she talks, but she still refuses to tell them anything. Holden asks her why she would do this, as she had a good life here, but she tells them that working for Earthers is not what Belters want, and that the Belt does not want them out here, and they're going to be reminded that they don't belong here again and again until they leave. Holden then gets a message from Monica Stewart that she has the course that the ship that took the protomolecule took. So Holden tells Bull that it's time to take the Rossi out on a hunt. Sakai tells them to wait and acts like there's something that she has to say, but then seems to reconsider and instead only says, "See you when you get back." So in the novels, they interrogated Sakai before the attack on Tycho Station, and it was in fact Fred Johnson himself who had hit him. Sakai wasn't as closely involved with the attacks as she was in the show, and he was a lot more afraid, and his attempts to stand up were obvious just bluster. After the attack, instead of getting a scene of Sakai being interrogated, we got a scene of Holden conferring with Fred Johnson in his office, who of course in the novels survived the attacks on Tycho Station. Fred talked about how Avasarala summoned him along with the Martian Prime Minister to a peace conference on Luna to decide how best to handle the situation, but Johnson also received a call from Anderson Dawes, who invited him to Palace Station and suggested that he turn Sakai over to Marco Inaros in order to get him a seat at the table with Marco. Johnson asked Holden if he decided to go to Luna, would he take him there on the Rosinante, and Holden told him yes. He then asked what if he decided to go to Palace Station, and Holden said he would tell him to go fuck himself. But it turned out that Johnson decided to go to Luna, so Holden agreed to take him on the Rosinante, provided he provided him with a crew. So in the novels, they didn't have the course of the ship that took the protomolecule, and they had already counted it as a loss. So I think both versions work well for the respective mediums, but I'm going to have to give the slight edge to the novels, as the way Sakai was so confident and conceited in the show really made my blood boil, and I much prefer the version where Sakai was a scared little shit that Johnson towered over and intimidated. So I'm going to give this a -1. So back on Earth, Amos and the others try to figure a way to get to the maintenance ladder. It seems stuck. Amos refers to Konachek as tiny, which he doesn't appreciate. Amos asks to borrow Morris's gun, but Rona explains the weapon is biologically locked, that only he can operate it. So Amos tells him to shoot at specific spots in the panel. He hesitates, but Rona tells him to do it, so he creates 2 bullet holes. Amos then calls Konachek over by calling him tiny and tells him to use the bullet holes to lift the panel open, and he does. So Amos states his plan is that one guard go up with Tiny to shoot the bullet holes while he pulls off the panels. Konachek tells Amos to stop calling him that, but they agree to his plan, and then the guards plays rock, paper, scissors or something of the sort to decide who will go up. Sullivan loses, so he goes up with Konachek. So in the novels, pretty much the same thing happened, although Konachek is a lot more overtly hostile in the books and more psychopathic. He and Amos get into heated arguments, and the guards have to threaten to shoot them both unless they shut up. Amos reminds them that he's a civilian, but they don't care. Also, Amos only calls Konachek tiny once in the novels, and he does hate it. The show focuses more on that, however. Ultimately, I like the show's version of how Konachek behaves better. Rather than being a straight-out psychopath, he has a sort of friendly demeanor, which is just a facade for how much of a violent psychopath he is, which I actually think plays a lot better. So I'm going to give this a +3. So we then go to the Razorback, where Alex watches the news of the attacks on Earth and Mars, and Fred Johnson's assassination and the theft of the protomolecule. Alex tells Bobby they should call Holden to help, but she turns the idea down, saying it will give away their position. Besides, there's nothing they can do for him, but they can follow the traitors as she's convinced they're involved in these attacks somehow. Alex tracks the Barkeith is headed for the Hungarian asteroids, and Bobby says they need to change course to follow, but he does it in such a way that will make them appear like tourists on their way to Titan. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, news of the protomolecule sample theft was kept hidden from the public, so Alex was unaware of it at this stage. In fact, the events that occurred here happened before he was made aware of the attacks. Also in the show, they mentioned that the Martian Parliament was bombed, which actually did not occur in the novels. Instead, in the novels, the Martian Prime Minister was on a ship on his way to Luna, which was ambushed by Marco Nars, which is something I'll get into a lot more later on, as it actually was a main plot point in the books. In the novels, they were headed to the Hungarian asteroids to investigate missing ships for Holden rather than tracking the Martian traitors. In fact, they didn't know the 2 investigations were related. However, when they arrived at the Hungarian asteroids, they were made aware of the presence of a hidden fleet because one of the ships target locked them, and Alex communicated with them pretending to be innocent tourists. The fleet was in fact a Marco Nars fleet that were laying wait for the Prime Minister of Mars' ships as they plan to attack it. But as I said, I'll get more into that later on. As far as this scene goes, it's fine. Maybe not as exciting, but it is an interesting character beat, seeing how helpless Alex feels about the attack and how Bobby deals with focusing on the mission at hand. So I'm going to give this a +1. Next, we go over to the Pella, where Naomi is brought to is brought to the mess hall, where Marco, Philipson, and Corral are waiting for her. Marco tells Naomi she's free to move about the ship, so she asks if she's free, can she get in her ship and leave? But Marco says that it's no longer her ship, that she gave it to Philip, unless Philip wants to give it back to her. So he asks Philip if he wants to give the ship back to her, and he says no. She leaves in anger. Corral then asks Marco if it's wise to let her move about the ship freely, but he dismisses her concerns, and then Sin tells Marco he shouldn't toy with her like that. After Corral and Sin leave, Marco puts Philip in a headlock and tells him that he shouldn't have brought Naomi here, but since he did, here is where she'll stay. He then reminds him of the killing that he's done and why he did it, and that they need to stay focused on the mission at hand. In the hallways, Naomi is roaming around trying to find something to help her escape when Sin asks if she wants to help him repair the scrubbers. But she gets upset and asks if he really thinks that they'll just do repairs together and become best friends. She then chastises him for letting Marco poison Philip and participate in murdering millions, but Sin gets upset, saying that they had to do it as the inners made them thirst for water and gasp for air. He then explains that the inners will keep the new worlds to themselves, as most Belters can't live there, and those that can, their children won't be Belters anymore. So, in the novels, Philip doesn't act on his own to bring Naomi there. Marco orders him to do it, and his reasoning is to keep her safe. There are mess hall scenes, but there's a lot more of the crew in the mess hall, but not Marco, who no doubt considers himself too important to eat with the crew. Also, Naomi goes along with the crew and makes them think that she's okay with everything they're doing. Sin does go off on a rant about how they needed to attack Earth, but not in an argument, as Naomi pretends to agree with him. Also, what Sin says here about the Belters can't survive in the new worlds and those who can won't be Belters anymore is Marco's main line in the books. In fact, it's his main reasoning for committing the attacks, as he states that the worlds beyond the ring gates will mark the extinction of the Belter people. I'm not sure why they gave that line to Sin in the show instead. I think it made a lot more sense as Marco's main talking point, and I was disappointed that they changed it. Also, I don't really think it works that Philip brought Naomi on his own accord. Doesn't really make much sense to me. I liked it much better that Marco made him do it out of a narcissistic desire to show dominance over her once more. It made him a much more menacing villain, in my opinion. So I'm going to give this a -4. So back on Earth, Amos, Clarissa, Rona, and Morris are waiting at the bottom, speculating on what might have happened, when all of a sudden from above Sullivan plummets to his death. Rona and Morris immediately aim their weapons at Konachek and orders him to come down. Konachek yells back that Sullivan fell off, that he was complaining about his leg the whole way up and that it must have given way. Nobody buys that. Rona again yells at him to come down, but he says no, and that he's almost there, and he tells her to come up. Amos tells her to go, that he'll look after Peaches, but Rona says they're not splitting up again. Then she goes up a ladder, followed by Morris, and Amos and Clarissa follow behind. As they climb, the elevator above falls. They duck and hold as it collapses. Once it's gone, they can see sunlight, which Clarissa points out is odd, as there should be a building above them. So in the novels, Sullivan does fall and die, and Konachek likewise claims that he fell. However, in the books, Amos tries to convince Rona that he did fall, even though he knows himself that it isn't true. He just doesn't want her to kill Konachek because they still need him. Amos also suggests that they go up without him, that he'll look after Clarissa, but Rona rejects the notion and sends Morris up the ladder, followed by Amos and Clarissa, and she brings up the rear so she can keep an eye on them, and she threatens to shoot them if they step out of line. So both versions work, but again, I kind of prefer the show's version of Konachek. Plus, I think it was unnecessary for Rona to be as hostile as she was to Amos in the books. So I'm going to give this a +1. So back on the Pella, Naomi is eating alone in a different mess hall when Corella enters, and when she sees Naomi staring at the coffee machine, she asks if she's thinking of her Erter, James Olden. She then tells her that she never liked her and was happy when she left and wished that she never came back, as she always thought she was smarter than everyone else. Naomi says that she wished she had been stupider, and Corral guessed that she was referring to the Gomorrah Augustus Code that she came up with and Marco used to destroy the ships. Corral said that she was hoping to remind her of that, and then tells her Marco will never let her leave, and that's after what she's seen, and then Corral leaves the room. Naomi then pockets the knife she was eating with and then goes to the command center to find Marco. She sees him working on something and calls to him and says that she needs to speak with him, obviously with the intent to kill him, but he says not now and walks away. When Naomi tries to sneak up on him, Philip sees her and grabs her and takes her out of the command center, saying that she shouldn't be there. While in the elevator, Philip tells her that she should be grateful to him for saving her life, and that's when she realizes they plan to use the Gomorrah Augustus Code to destroy the Rocinante. So in the novels, Corral isn't as hostile to Naomi. They don't have a hostile encounter as they do here. As I said earlier, Naomi was actually pretending to go along with Marco and was being very friendly with the crew. The one exception there was when she had an encounter with Marco, who was being very patronizing, trying to manipulate her under his control again. But Naomi didn't bite and instead goaded him of being jealous of Holden, and Marco says that her Earther fuck buddy is of no consequence, making it clear that he is in fact jealous of Holden. In the novels, Philip was surprised when Naomi didn't come on the Rocinante to meet him. So in the moment, Naomi realizes that Marco was counting on Holden coming with her in order to take him off the board. She tells Marco that he couldn't imagine her coming on her own because he thinks that she's so weak she needs a man to do everything for her. And it's obvious that she's getting to him, so in anger he tells her that Holden will soon be gone and she'll be responsible for it. Later, Naomi puts it together that Marco plans to use her Gomorrah Augustus Code to destroy the Rocinante. So I gotta say, I actually prefer the book's version of events. As much as I did like Naomi trying to kill Marco, as that was a really gutsy move, it was also a suicidal move, as there's no way she would make it out alive if she killed Marco. I prefer instead a more witty and calculated and clever move of trying to antagonize Marco to get information out of him and actually succeeding in doing so. I like that better as a way for her to discover that they planned on using the Gomorrah Augustus Code to destroy the Rocinante, as in the show she found out because Corral and Philip slipped and gave too much away, but in the book she earned it by antagonizing Marco into slipping up and giving it away. She definitely was smarter and more calculated in the books, which I prefer, so I'm going to give this a -3. So back on Earth, we see the survivors make it to the top. Morris goes first, followed by Konachek, then Brona, then Clarissa, then Amos. They discover the building had been completely destroyed along with everything else around them, as it looks like a post-apocalyptic, horrific landscape. Konachek starts laughing as soon as he sees the devastation, but the rest of them are dumbfounded and can't believe what they're looking at. Amos notes it must have been one hell of a rock, but before they even realize it, Konachek had choked Morris to death, and he tosses his lifeless body aside. Rona raises her gun, but with lightning speed, Konachek grabs it from her and chucks it down the elevator shaft. But before he can attack her, Amos charges at him, but Konachek easily brushes it off and grabs Amos by the neck and lifts him up in the air and starts choking him to death. Clarissa tries to activate her mods, but the blockers are still preventing them from working, so instead she just collapses to the ground. Konachek taunts Amos by telling him to call him Tiny again, and moves towards the shaft to throw him down, but someone fires a couple of shots that land right on Konachek's gut. They look over to see Rona holding Morris's hand in order to operate his gun. Amos breaks free and kicks Konachek in the nuts, and when he bends over in pain, Amos does a suplex on him that throws him down the elevator shaft to his death. Rona is still in shock, says that her ex was looking after her kid. Amos tells her to go find her kid, but she says that she needs to stay with the prisoner, but Amos insists that she should go find her kid, so she leaves to do that. Amos then goes to Clarissa, who is smiling as she feels the wind blowing on her, and says that she missed it and never thought she'd feel the wind again. She asks what they should do now. Amos doesn't know, but that they should leave. He grabs a flag that is hanging nearby and uses it to wrap Clarissa up in, and they go. So, in the novels, Morris was the first one up, followed by Konachek, and then Amos, then Clarissa, but before Rona could make it up, Konachek had killed Morris, and Amos tries to attack him, but Konachek gets the better of him and chokes him up in the air. Rona, who is still on the ladder, grabs at Konachek's legs from behind. He shakes her off, but this distracts him enough to allow Clarissa to use Morris's hand to fire his gun that hits Konachek. Then Amos kicks Konachek in the nuts, and it's that blow that knocks him down the elevator shaft to his death. Rona then says that she has people that she wants to look for, and Amos suggests that she go do that, but she insists that she needs to stay with the prisoner, but Amos tells her that he'll watch Clarissa until she gets back. She nods and then leaves. Clarissa notes that she's never coming back. Clarissa makes the same comment about the wind, but in this version it's pouring down rain with high-speed winds, so very uncomfortable, so Amos just thinks she's crazy. Amos asks where they should go, and it's here Clarissa comes up with the plan to use spaceships from her family's rich friends that she knows will be abandoned to get to Luna, and Amos suggests getting help from his friends in Baltimore in order to get access to the ships, so they leave to head to Baltimore. So I kind of prefer that it was Clarissa that shot Konachek and not Rona, as it seems more like a hero woman that should be reserved for a known character rather than a 2-episode guest star. And it's kind of a cop-out how she just tries her mods and just collapses and it doesn't do anything. But I did like the show's version where Konachek tells Amos to stop calling him Tiny. That was a nice arc, and I also prefer that awesome suplex that Amos does on him rather than just the kick to the nuts being the thing that killed him. Also, I think having the quiet moment of Clarissa noting how great it was to feel the wind worked better without the rainstorm, and how Amos could somewhat relate to her. So I'm going to give this a +2. Back on Tycho Station, we see Holden, Bull, and a new crew board the Rosinante to prepare to leave. Holden asks who his pilot is, and Bull says, "You're looking at him," and they initiate the startup sequence. On the Pella, we see Naomi go to Sen, who's working on the filters, and she begins to help him as they talk about Philip. Naomi says that Philip refused to give her the ship out of a loyalty to his father, and Sen tells her not to assume she knows Philip's reasonings as she doesn't know him, not yet. While Sen's back is turned, Naomi grabs a wrench and asks him if they use the Gamora Augustus code on the Rosinante, and then she hits him with it and knocks him out. She then grabs his hand terminal and uses it to call the Rosinante. On the Rosinante, Holden is more than halfway through the startup sequence when he gets a call from Sen, who he's unfamiliar with, but when he opens it, it's Naomi who's yelling at him not to start up the Rosinante that has been sabotaged to blow. She then says that she's being held captive by Marco Inaros, but then Sen grabs her from behind and ends the transmission. Holden immediately aborts the startup sequence, and when Bull asks why, he plays him the message from Naomi. So in the novels, they spent a lot more time introducing his crew on the Rocinante as they introduce each one of them. In fact, Holden asked Drummer for more personal information about them, and she went into some great detail about each one. Now, an important thing to note about this scene is that in the show, a lot of people complained that Holden was stupid for not realizing that Sakai, who had been in charge of retrofitting the Rocinante, would have sabotaged it. I mean, obviously. But in the novels, Holden specifically said that he wanted the ship checked out and cleared of sabotage before he used it. Apparently, the Gamora Augustus code is undetectable, which is part of what makes it so effective. So in the books, he did in fact consider that possibility. As far as Naomi goes, first of all, this part actually takes place a lot later in the story in the novels than it does here in the show. By this time, Marco is already attacking the Martian fleet that's carrying the Prime Minister, but I'll talk more about that in later videos. However, in the novels, Naomi uses the battle as a distraction to contact the Rocinante and warn them about the sabotage. She unstraps herself from her quarters in the middle of battle and gets beat up pretty badly trying to move about the ship during high-speed maneuvers. But after a struggle, she manages to make it to the cargo bay, albeit really beat up and bloody, and she uses the comm to send out a message that she knows won't reach Tycho Station, but she asks anyone who hears it to retransmit it as a message to James Holden and describes the sabotage. In fact, later on in the story, when Marco fabricates the distress call from Naomi to lure the Rocinante into a trap, he uses part of her exact words from this message about this being a message for James Holden asking people to retransmit. After the battle is over, she calmly walks out of the cargo bay all beat up and bloody, and everyone's in the hallway waiting for her, and they know what she just did, and they just stare at her in disbelief. As in the novel, she was pretending to be on their side all along. She just says that she'll be in her quarters and then calmly goes back there. As for Holden, in the novels, Holden was arguing with Monica Stewart about an interview she gave him in which she asked him questions that they didn't agree on, when suddenly she got wide-eyed when she received the distress call from Naomi, and she played it for Holden. He wasn't on the Rocinante at the time, so he called Drummer, who was doing the startup sequence, and told her to shut it down immediately, and he prayed that she wouldn't argue with him or ask him why, but thankfully she didn't, and she simply shut it down, then asked him why she did that. Also, the novels made it super clear that had the Rocinante exploded, it would have taken most of Tycho Station with it, which is why Monica was so horrified at the message, because she knew it meant she was about to die, even though they were on Tycho Station. That's something that the show didn't make very clear as a motivation as to why Sakai hesitated to let Holden leave on the Rocinante, because she knew it would mean her death. So although I do like the show's version, I ultimately have to go with the books here, as they explain more as to why Holden would fly the Rocinante without trying Sakai's work, or without double checking, because in the books he did. And also it made it clear that half of Tycho would have blown up as well. Also, the scene was pretty badass when Amy took a beating just to warn Holden and then calmly walked back to her quarters triumphant. Again, it gave her more agency rather than screaming at Marco and Philip as she was being locked up in the room. So I'm going to give this a -2. So we then go back to the Razorback, which has arrived at the Hungarian asteroids, where they see the Barkeith is met by 2 Martian frigates that meet with a Belter ship. Bobby assumes they're there to sell the Belters weapons, but then the barkeep leaves, heading away from the sun at a high burn, but the escorts stay behind. This confuses them at first until Bobby realizes that the Martian ships are the weapons that are being sold to the Belters, that Marco Inaros is fighting his war on Martian ships. They start to move off, and Alex tries to ping their ships to see where they're headed when they're spotted. Alex immediately makes a run for it, but one of the Martian ships pursue them. Alex notes that they're Belters, so they can't take high burn for as long as they can, but also they knew that too. So indeed, they fire a missile at them. Alex tries to avoid it, but Bobby realizes that they're not going to make it. But Alex says he has one last thing to try, and he jettisons the fusion core, which collides with the missile, exploding it, and then the Razorback is thrown lifeless into space. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, the Razorback was spotted by a Martian corvette under Marco Inaros' control that was lying in wait for the Martian Prime Minister. Alex communicates with them, claiming to be tourists, and tried to get them to respond, and kept informing them of what they were doing because he knew they were being target locked. In one of Naomi's chapters, she overhears Marco ordering the destruction of Alex's ship, although she had no idea at the time that Alex was on it. So they fire 2 missiles at the Razorback, and Alex likewise tries to shake them, but he knows that he can't. Just when he thinks the situation is hopeless, Bobby messages him, as they're going too fast to talk at this stage, and tells him to head for the Martian fleet carrying the Prime Minister, as it's close by, because that's why these ships are there, to attack it. And Alex realizes that they'll be armed with defenses that can destroy the missiles if they get there in time. However, as they head there, Alex realizes that they won't get to them before the first missile hits them. So he drops the fusion core, which takes care of the first missile. And the Martian ships, PDCs, take care of the second missile. So rather than the Razorback floating dead in space at the mercy of Marco Inaros' people, they're taking on board the Martian ship for refuge. So I have a huge problem with why the show left out the storyline with Marco attacking the Martian Prime Minister, but I'll actually cover that in later videos. I felt the show's version of events was, as far as this scene goes, I felt the show's version of events was just as intense as the books. In fact, I like the added element of them tracking the Martian ships and actually seeing the handoff of the Martian ships to Marco Inaros, which in the novels had already occurred by this point. So I'm actually going to give this a +2. So my final adaptation score for Down and Out is a -3. Not that I thought this was a bad episode. I actually really liked this episode, and I think the Amos scenes improved upon what the books did. However, as an adaptation, the Holden and Naomi scenes didn't quite stack up to what the books did, as the books explained them better, and they had Naomi have way more agency and control instead of being such a damsel like she was in the show, which is what I prefer. So ultimately, a slightly lacking adaptation. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 5, Episode 5. I'm going to take a break for about a month or so before I continue with this series, as it's really time consuming to do and I need a little break. But I shall return to complete the second half of Season 5 in about a month and a half. So keep an eye out for that, as well as many more videos on other shows like Star Trek The Outer Limits, Breaking Bad, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.